Picture this: America's greatest war hero, a man who single-handedly held off an entire German company while standing atop a burning tank destroyer, lies dead in the wreckage of a small plane on a Virginia mountainside. The year is 1971, and the official report calls it pilot error in bad weather. Case closed. But what if I told you that for more than 50 years, there's been something lurking beneath the surface of Audie Murphy's death, something that connects to the demons he fought long after the guns of World War II fell silent? What you're about to hear isn't just about how America's most decorated soldier died. It's about what he was running from, what destroyed him from the inside, and why the truth took decades to emerge. This is the Audie Murphy mystery, and trust me, once you know the whole story, you'll never see heroism the same way again. Before we dive into the mystery that haunted the final years of his life and the circumstances surrounding his death, we need to understand who Audie Murphy really was, because his story doesn't start with medals and glory. It starts in the dirt-poor cotton fields of Texas, where survival itself was an act of courage. Audie Leon Murphy was born on June 20, 1925, in a dilapidated sharecropper's shack near Kingston, Texas. This wasn't just poverty. This was the kind of desperate, soul-crushing destitution that most Americans today simply cannot fathom. His father, Emmett Murphy, was a sharecropper, which meant the family didn't even own the land they worked. They were at the mercy of landowners, seasonal crop yields, and an economic system designed to keep poor families trapped in perpetual debt. Audie was one of 12 children, and feeding that many mouths on a sharecropper's income was virtually impossible. The Murphy children knew hunger intimately. Not the kind where you skip a meal and feel uncomfortable, but the gnawing, painful hunger that follows you to bed every night and wakes you up every morning. They wore clothes until they literally fell apart, often going barefoot even in winter. Their home had no electricity, no running water, and barely any protection from the Texas heat or the bitter cold of winter nights. Young Audie learned to hunt at an incredibly young age, not for sport, but because if he didn't bring home rabbits or squirrels, his siblings might not eat that day. He became an exceptional marksman out of pure necessity, a skill that would later save his life and the lives of countless fellow soldiers on the battlefields of Europe. Then, in 1936, when Audie was just 11 years old, his father abandoned the family. Emmett Murphy simply walked away one day and never came back, leaving Audie's mother, Josie Bell Murphy, to somehow keep 12 children alive on her own during the Great Depression. It's hard to imagine a more difficult situation. Josie worked herself to the bone, but it wasn't enough. Audie dropped out of school in the 5th grade to work full-time picking cotton, earning $1 per day for backbreaking labor under the brutal Texas sun. $1 per day. For a child doing a man's work. He gave every penny to his mother to help feed his younger siblings. This wasn't the childhood of a future hero. This was survival, pure and simple, and it forged in young Audie a toughness and determination that would serve him in ways no one could have predicted. The tragedy deepened in 1941 when Josie Murphy died. Audie was only 16 years old, and suddenly he and his siblings were orphans. The younger children were placed with relatives or in foster care, but Audie was determined to find his own way. He took whatever work he could find, laboring in garages, on farms, anywhere that would pay him a few cents to help him survive. The weight of responsibility he felt for his family, combined with the trauma of losing his mother and the abandonment by his father, created psychological wounds that would never fully heal. But then, on December 7, 1941, everything changed. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and the United States was suddenly at war. For Audie Murphy, the war represented something incredible, an escape from poverty and a chance to serve his country. The problem was, he was only 16 years old, underweight, and stood just 5 feet 5 inches tall. He tried to enlist in the Marines, but they rejected him, saying he was too small. The Navy turned him down. The paratroopers wouldn't take him. Most young men would have given up, but Audie Murphy wasn't most young men. He had been fighting for survival his entire life, and he wasn't about to let something like rejection stop him. Finally, shortly after his 17th birthday in 1942, Audie altered his birth certificate to meet the age requirement and enlisted in the United States Army. His sister helped him with the paperwork, essentially forging documents so he could go to war. The Army accepted him, though even they had reservations about this skinny kid from Texas who looked more like a boy than a soldier. Audie Murphy shipped out for basic training, and something remarkable happened. Everything that had made him seem unsuitable for military service, his small stature, his youth, his quiet demeanor, turned out to be deceptive. This kid from the Texas cotton fields was tougher than leather. He excelled in every aspect of training, particularly marksmanship. Those years of hunting to feed his family had given him an almost supernatural ability with a rifle. He could hit targets that other soldiers couldn't even see. More importantly, he had something that couldn't be taught, an absolute absence of fear when it came to protecting others. The poverty, the loss, the constant struggle had burned away something in Audie that most people have, that voice that tells you to protect yourself first. For Audie Murphy, protecting his fellow soldiers would become more important than his own life, and that would make him the deadliest soldier the Germans would ever face. In 1943, Murphy deployed to North Africa with Company B of the 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. He saw his first combat in Sicily, and while other soldiers struggled with the terror of battle, Audie seemed to transform. The chaos, the violence, the life-and-death stakes, it was all just another form of survival, and survival was something Audie Murphy knew how to do. He fought through Sicily, then Italy, then southern France, and with each battle, his reputation grew. He wasn't reckless, he was calculated, methodical, and absolutely lethal. He earned his first decoration for bravery in Sicily, and it wouldn't be his last. Not even close. What made Audie Murphy exceptional wasn't just his courage under fire, though he had that in abundance. It was his tactical mind. Despite having only a 5th-grade education, he could read a battlefield like a chess grandmaster reads a board. He understood instinctively where the enemy would be, what they would do, and how to exploit their weaknesses. He led from the front, never asking his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself, and they would have followed him anywhere because they knew he would die before he let them down. And time again, Audie Murphy proved that he was willing to make that sacrifice. The list of his heroic actions during the war reads like something from a Hollywood script, which is ironic because later in life, Hollywood would indeed turn his story into a movie. But we'll get to that. In September 1944 in France, Murphy's best friend was killed right in front of him. Instead of breaking down or freezing, Audie went into a controlled rage. He grabbed a machine gun and single-handedly assaulted a German position, killing multiple enemy soldiers and forcing the rest to retreat. He then turned the captured German machine gun on their retreating forces. For this action, he received his first battlefield commission, rising from enlisted man to officer, a rare honor that spoke to his proven leadership under fire. But the action that would earn Audie Murphy the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, came on January 26, 1945, near the Colmar Pocket in France. Murphy's company was under attack by 6 German tanks and approximately 250 German infantry. The situation was desperate. Murphy ordered his men to fall back to better defensive positions while he coordinated artillery strikes on the advancing Germans. Then, in a moment that defies belief, one of the American tank destroyers in Murphy's position was hit and caught fire. Most men would have run from a burning vehicle filled with ammunition and fuel that could explode at any second. Audie Murphy climbed on top of it. Standing fully exposed on this burning tank destroyer, with German soldiers closing in from all sides, Murphy grabbed the vehicle's 50 caliber machine gun and began firing. For over an hour, Audie Murphy stood alone on that burning tank destroyer, calling in artillery strikes on his field telephone while simultaneously mowing down German infantry with a machine gun. German bullets hit all around him. Shrapnel tore into his leg. The tank destroyer beneath his feet could have exploded at any second. But he didn't move. He didn't retreat. He kept firing until he ran out of ammunition, and by the time he finally climbed down and rejoined his men, he had killed or wounded over 50 German soldiers and destroyed the enemy attack. His actions saved his entire company and held a critical defensive position. For this, he received the Medal of Honor, but that was just one of his decorations. By the end of the war, Audie Murphy had received every combat award for valor that the United States Army could bestow, including the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, and 3 Purple Hearts for being wounded in action. He also received decorations from France and Belgium. He was, without question, the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. But here's where the story takes a turn, and this is crucial to understanding the mystery that would follow him for the rest of his life. Audie Murphy came home a hero in 1945, but he didn't come home whole. He couldn't. Nobody could experience what he experienced, see what he saw, do what he did, and come out the other side unchanged. Today, we call it post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. In Audie Murphy's time, it was called battle fatigue or shell shock, and there was a tremendous stigma attached to it. Soldiers were expected to just push through it, to be tough, to not talk about weakness or fear or psychological damage. So Audie Murphy, like so many veterans, tried to bury it. He tried to ignore the nightmares that woke him up screaming. He tried to push down the flashbacks that would hit him without warning. He tried to function like a normal person, but the war had carved pieces out of his soul, and those pieces were never coming back. When Murphy returned to Texas after the war, he was a celebrity. The hometown boy who had become America's greatest war hero. But fame doesn't pay the bills, and Audie still needed to support his siblings. He tried to work normal jobs, but how do you go back to being a mechanic or a farmhand when you've led men in combat and received the Medal of Honor from the President of the United States? Murphy was adrift, struggling with poverty again despite his fame, when Hollywood came calling. Actor James Cagney saw a photograph of Audie Murphy on the cover of Life magazine and was struck by something in the young soldier's face. Cagney invited Murphy to Hollywood and helped him launch an acting career, which seemed like a perfect solution. Here was a genuine war hero with an incredible story, and he looked the part with his boyish good looks and intense eyes. Surely Hollywood could turn him into a star, right? And to some extent, they did. Audie Murphy appeared in 44 films between 1948 and 1969, mostly westerns and war movies. His most successful film was To Hell and Back in 1955, where he played himself in an adaptation of his own autobiography. The film was a huge hit, becoming Universal Studios' highest-grossing film until Jaws 20 years later. Murphy proved to be a capable actor, bringing an authentic toughness to his roles that made-believe cowboys and soldiers couldn't match. He was particularly good in films like The Red Badge of Courage and No Name on the Bullet, where his natural intensity translated powerfully to the screen. He even wrote poetry and country music songs, showing a sensitive, artistic side that contrasted sharply with his warrior image. One of his poems, The Crosses Grow on Anzio, reflected on the friends he lost in the war and was later set to music. But success in Hollywood came with its own set of problems, and here's where we start to see the cracks forming that would eventually lead to the mystery surrounding his death. First, Audie Murphy never stopped fighting the war in his head. Every single night, he struggled with violent nightmares. He would wake up reliving battles, sometimes attacking whatever was near him as if he was still fighting Germans. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, something that terrified his wife. He suffered from insomnia, and when he did manage to fall asleep, the nightmares would come. He experienced depression, severe headaches, and sudden fits of rage. Today, we would recognize all of these as classic symptoms of severe PTSD, but in the 1950s and 60s, mental health treatment was primitive at best and often stigmatized. Veterans, especially hero veterans like Murphy, were expected to just be tough and get over it. To cope with the insomnia and nightmares, Murphy began taking sleeping pills, and he quickly developed an addiction. This was long before the modern understanding of prescription drug addiction and its dangers. Doctors handed out pills freely, and patients took them without understanding the consequences. Murphy became dependent on these medications, and when he finally realized he had a problem, he did something characteristically brave. He locked himself in a motel room for a week and went through withdrawal cold turkey. The agony of that experience was so intense that he later spoke publicly about it, becoming one of the first public figures to openly discuss both PTSD and addiction. His willingness to talk about these issues helped countless other veterans seek treatment, but it couldn't fully solve his own problems. Compounding his psychological struggles were increasing financial problems, and this is where things get really interesting in terms of the mystery surrounding his death. Despite earning good money from his films, Audie Murphy was terrible with money. Part of this was because he was incredibly generous. He would give money to anyone who needed it, particularly fellow veterans. He funded college educations for the children of soldiers who died in the war. He helped struggling families pay their bills. His generosity was legendary, but it left him chronically short of cash. He also made numerous bad investments in various business ventures that collapsed, costing him hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the real financial killer was gambling. Audie Murphy developed a serious gambling addiction that would destroy him financially. He bet on horse races, card games, and sports, often losing massive amounts of money. He bought and bred thoroughbred racehorses, pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into a hobby that rarely if ever paid off. Friends estimated that Murphy lost somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 million through gambling, an astronomical sum, especially considering that he never commanded the kind of salaries that major Hollywood stars received. He was a solid B-movie actor, not a leading man in major productions, which meant his income, while substantial, wasn't enough to support the lifestyle he was living and the gambling debts he was accumulating. By the mid-1960s, Murphy's film career was declining. The Western genre was falling out of favor, and Murphy was getting older. He was no longer the baby-faced young soldier or cowboy. The roles dried up, and the money stopped coming in, but the gambling debts didn't stop growing. Then came the catastrophic blow. In 1968, Audie Murphy declared bankruptcy. America's most decorated war hero was broke. The man who had risked everything for his country, who had saved countless lives, couldn't pay his bills. The bankruptcy proceedings revealed the extent of his financial disaster. He owed substantial sums to the Internal Revenue Service for back taxes. He had gambling debts scattered across the country. His investments had failed. He had nothing left. For a man like Audie Murphy, whose entire identity was built on strength, courage, and never giving up, this financial collapse was devastating. He was 43 years old, broke, struggling with PTSD, and watching his career evaporate. He needed money desperately, not just to pay his debts, but to support his wife Pamela and their 2 sons. So Murphy began taking any work he could get. He made low-budget films that were beneath his talent. He explored business opportunities that might bring in cash. He became less discriminating about the deals he made and the people he made them with, and this is where things get dark, because when you're desperate for money and willing to make deals with anyone, you sometimes end up dealing with very dangerous people. This brings us to the events leading up to May 28, 1971, and the plane crash that killed Audie Murphy. The official story, as reported at the time and recorded in the National Transportation Safety Board investigation, goes like this. Murphy was flying as a passenger on a private Aero Commander 680 twin-engine aircraft from Atlanta, Georgia, to Martinsville, Virginia, where he had a business meeting scheduled. The pilot was a man named Herman Butler, and there were 4 other passengers besides Murphy. As the plane approached Virginia, it encountered bad weather, heavy clouds, and rain that reduced visibility. The NTSB investigation concluded that the pilot became disoriented in the poor visibility and inadvertently flew into Brushy Mountain near Roanoke, Virginia. The plane crashed into the mountainside at around 3,000 feet elevation, killing everyone on board instantly. Pilot error in instrument meteorological conditions was cited as the probable cause. Case closed. A tragic accident that claimed America's greatest war hero. Except that's not the whole story, not even close, and this is where the mystery begins. First, let's talk about why Murphy was on that plane and who he was meeting with. In the months before his death, Murphy had become involved with some questionable business associates. He was desperate for money, remember, and he was exploring various business ventures that might solve his financial crisis. Some of these ventures involved people connected to organized crime. Now, it's important to understand that Murphy himself wasn't a criminal. He was a desperate man making increasingly poor decisions about who to trust and who to do business with. But the fact remains that in his final months, Audie Murphy was dealing with some very shady characters, and some researchers believe that the business meeting he was flying to that day involved people connected to organized crime operations. The pilot, Herman Butler, was not Murphy's usual pilot. Murphy had flown many times before and had pilots he trusted, but Butler was relatively inexperienced in that particular aircraft and in flying in instrument conditions, meaning poor visibility where you have to rely on instruments rather than visual references. Why was an inexperienced pilot flying a war hero and several businessmen in questionable weather? That's question number 1. Question number 2. The weather that day, while not ideal, wasn't catastrophically bad. Pilots in that region regularly flew in similar conditions. Butler had filed an instrument flight plan, which meant he was legally certified and supposedly prepared to fly in low visibility. So why did an instrument-rated pilot with a properly equipped aircraft crash into a mountain in conditions that, while challenging, shouldn't have been fatal for a competent pilot following proper procedures? The NTSB report cited pilot error, but it also noted some concerning details that didn't get much attention at the time. The aircraft's flight path in its final minutes was erratic, suggesting the pilot might have been distracted or dealing with some kind of emergency. There were no radio calls indicating distress, no mayday signals, nothing to suggest the pilot knew they were in trouble until the moment of impact. Some aviation experts who reviewed the case later found this strange. Usually, when a pilot realizes they're lost or in danger, they try to contact air traffic control or climb to a safer altitude. Butler did neither. He just flew straight into a mountain, and nobody knows why. Then there's the matter of what happened after the crash. The wreckage wasn't found until 2 days later, on May 30th, despite search efforts beginning almost immediately. When the crash site was finally located, investigators noted that the aircraft had struck the mountain at a relatively shallow angle and that the wreckage was spread over a considerable area, suggesting the plane was flying at a normal speed and altitude, not attempting any kind of evasive maneuver or emergency procedure. Everything about the crash suggested that the pilot had no idea the mountain was there until the plane hit it, which raises the question, why? Modern aircraft, even in 1971, had altimeters that tell you exactly how high you are. They had radio navigation aids. Why would an instrument-rated pilot with all of these tools fly directly into a mountain at cruising speed without realizing the danger? Now, here's where things get into speculation and conspiracy theory territory. But it's important to mention because these theories have persisted for decades and, in some cases, are supported by circumstantial evidence. Some researchers believe that the crash was not an accident. They point to Murphy's financial troubles, his involvement with questionable business associates, and the fact that a man who had survived the entire Second World War without being killed in combat conveniently died just as his financial and personal problems were reaching a crisis point. Was it possible, these theorists ask, that Murphy was murdered? And if so, by whom and why? One theory suggests that Murphy's business dealings had put him in debt to organized crime figures, and when he couldn't pay, they arranged for the plane crash as a message or simply to eliminate a problem. This theory is supported by the fact that Murphy was indeed dealing with some shady characters in his final months, and several of the other passengers on the plane that day had their own questionable backgrounds. Another theory suggests that Murphy knew too much about certain illegal activities his business associates were involved in, and they couldn't risk him talking, either to authorities or in a desperate attempt to make money by selling information. A third theory, darker still, suggests that Murphy himself might have been suicidal. His PTSD was getting worse, not better. His finances were destroyed. His career was over. His marriage was under strain. Is it possible that he saw the plane crash coming and didn't try to warn anyone or stop it because, on some level, he wanted it to happen? The truth, as is often the case with these mysteries, probably lies somewhere in between pure accident and deliberate murder. Here's what we know for certain. Audie Murphy was in serious financial and psychological distress in his final years. He was making increasingly desperate and poor decisions about money and business. He was dealing with people involved in illegal activities. He died in a plane crash that was ruled pilot error but had some strange elements that don't fully add up. What we don't know, and probably never will know for certain, is whether that crash was truly an accident or whether something more sinister was at play. But here's what the mystery really reveals, and this is the part that isn't good, as promised in the title. The real tragedy of Audie Murphy's death isn't just that a hero died too young. It's that he died after years of suffering that could have been prevented if society had better understood and treated PTSD, if there had been better support for veterans struggling with mental health issues, if there had been intervention for his gambling addiction, if he hadn't been left to spiral into financial ruin and desperation. Audie Murphy survived hundreds of combat missions, was wounded 3 times, held off an entire German company by himself, and earned every medal America could give him. But he couldn't survive the aftermath. He couldn't survive the peace. After his death, Murphy's widow Pamela sued the insurance company and the aircraft operator for $10 million, arguing that the crash was due to negligence. The legal proceedings dragged on for years and revealed even more troubling details about the flight that day. Testimony showed that the pilot had actually requested a lower altitude just before the crash, putting the plane directly in the path of the mountain. Why would he do that in poor visibility? No satisfactory answer was ever provided. The case was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but the questions remained. Pamela Murphy, who never remarried after Audie's death, became a fierce advocate for veterans' rights and PTSD awareness. She worked at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Los Angeles for 35 years, dedicating her life to helping the kind of struggling veterans that her husband had been. When she died in 2010, she was buried next to Audie at Arlington National Cemetery, where his grave remains one of the most visited in that hallowed ground. Even decades after his death, people still come to pay their respects to America's greatest war hero, leaving flowers, flags, and notes of thanks. Audie Murphy's sons have largely stayed out of the public eye, but they've occasionally spoken about their father, describing a man who was loving but haunted, generous but troubled, a hero who couldn't escape the war even when he was home safe with his family. They remember the nightmares, the times he would wake up thinking he was back in combat, the loaded gun always within reach. They remember a father who tried his best to be normal but was fighting a battle every single day that nobody else could see. In the years since Murphy's death, his story has become emblematic of the price of war and the way society often fails its veterans. He spoke openly about his PTSD and addiction struggles at a time when doing so could have destroyed what remained of his career. He testified before Congress about the need for better mental health services for veterans. He tried to help other soldiers struggling with the same demons that plagued him. But ultimately, he couldn't save himself, and the circumstances of his death remain frustratingly ambiguous. Modern researchers who have examined the case point out several red flags that suggest the crash might not have been as simple as pilot error. The aircraft was in good mechanical condition. The weather, while poor, was within the pilot's ratings to handle. The erratic flight path and the request for lower altitude just before impact suggest either severe spatial disorientation, which is possible but unusual for an instrument-rated pilot, or some other factor that distracted or incapacitated the pilot. Some have speculated about medical emergency, mechanical failure that wasn't caught in the investigation, or even sabotage, though no evidence of sabotage was ever found. What makes the mystery so compelling and so tragic is that it encapsulates everything about Audie Murphy's post-war life. The questions without answers, the suffering that went largely unacknowledged, the desperation that led to poor decisions, and the ultimate price paid by a man who had already given everything for his country. Murphy spent 26 years after World War II trying to outrun the war, trying to find peace, trying to build a life beyond the battlefield. But the war never left him. It was there in his nightmares, in his hypervigilance, in his inability to feel safe, in the way he slept with a loaded gun because some part of him never stopped expecting an attack. The financial destruction that gambling addiction brought to his life was, in many ways, another symptom of his PTSD. Gambling provided an escape, an adrenaline rush that distracted him from the pain, a way to feel something other than the numbness and depression that plagued him. But it also destroyed him, leaving him vulnerable to exploitation by dangerous people and forcing him to take risks that might have ultimately cost him his life. Whether the plane crash was pure accident, negligent homicide, or something more sinister, the fact is that Audie Murphy never should have been in that desperate position in the first place. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of Murphy's story is how close he came to getting the help he needed but ultimately couldn't quite reach it. He recognized his sleeping pill addiction and beat it through sheer willpower, an extraordinary achievement. He spoke publicly about his struggles, helping to reduce the stigma around PTSD and addiction. He sought treatment for his symptoms at times. But the support systems simply weren't there in the 1950s and 60s the way they are today, imperfect as they still are. Veterans were expected to just tough it out, and asking for help was seen as weakness. For a man like Audie Murphy, whose entire identity was built on strength and courage, admitting he needed help was incredibly difficult. By the time he truly acknowledged the depth of his problems, he was already in too deep, financially ruined, psychologically battered, and running out of options. So what's the final answer to the Audie Murphy mystery? The truth is, we'll probably never know with absolute certainty exactly what happened in those final minutes before the plane hit Brushy Mountain. We don't know if it was simple pilot error, if there were other factors involved, if Murphy's dangerous business associates played any role, or if some combination of circumstances created a perfect storm of tragedy. What we do know is that Audie Murphy, the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II, a genuine hero who saved countless lives and served his country with distinction, died at age 45, broke, troubled, and far from the glory days when the whole nation celebrated his courage. The mystery isn't really about the plane crash. The mystery is how a nation can celebrate a war hero, give him every medal, honor him in parades and ceremonies, and then fail so completely to help him when he needed it most. The mystery is how a man can be strong enough to face down an entire German company but not strong enough to overcome the psychological wounds that combat inflicted. The mystery is how we, as a society, can still be failing veterans in similar ways today, more than 50 years after Audie Murphy's death. In the end, maybe the mystery is a mirror. It reflects back at us our own failure to truly care for those who fight our wars. We love warriors when they're winning battles and earning medals. We're less interested when they're struggling with PTSD, addiction, and financial ruin. Audie Murphy's story, from his impoverished childhood through his extraordinary heroism to his troubled post-war years and mysterious death, is ultimately a story about the cost of war and the price of heroism. It's about a nation's debt to its veterans and how inadequately we repay that debt. It's about the invisible wounds that never heal and the way trauma can destroy a person from the inside even decades after the traumatic events have ended. If there's a lesson in the Audie Murphy mystery, it's this: heroism in war doesn't guarantee a happy ending in peace. The battles don't end when the shooting stops. For men like Audie Murphy, the war never really ended at all. It just changed forms, becoming an internal struggle that was, in many ways, harder to fight than any external enemy. And in that internal war, America's greatest warrior ultimately lost. Whether his death on Brushy Mountain was accident, negligence, or something more sinister, the real tragedy is that it was preventable. With better mental health support, with intervention for his addiction and financial problems, with a society that truly understood and addressed the needs of combat veterans, Audie Murphy might have lived to old age, might have found peace, might have won the war against his demons the same way he won the war against the Germans. But that didn't happen, and the mystery remains, a haunting reminder of everything we owe veterans and everything we fail to give them. Audie Murphy stands as both our greatest example of military heroism and our most painful example of how we abandon warriors once the parades are over. His story doesn't have a satisfying ending because there is no satisfying ending to a tragedy. There's only the cold fact of a plane crash on a Virginia mountain, a war hero dead too young, and questions that will never be fully answered. That's the Audie Murphy mystery, and you're right, it isn't good. It's heartbreaking, frustrating, and should make every one of us think about how we treat veterans, how we address mental health, and what we really mean when we say we support those who serve. Audie Murphy deserved better. Every veteran deserves better. And until we collectively do better, the mystery of what destroys our heroes will continue to haunt us, just as the war haunted Audie Murphy until his final moments on that mountain in Virginia.